por qué compramos lo que compramos? Las marcas han venido ejerciendo un enorme poder sobre nosotros hasta el punto que terminamos comprando productos y servicios que eventualmente no necesitábamos. El reconocido gurú de las marcas, Martin Lindstrom, lleva mucho tiempo estudiando la anatomía de las marcas y los comportamientos del consumidor, los cuales ha documentado en libros bestsellers que son referentes del marketing moderno como Buyology y Brandwashed. Martin Lindstrom nació en Dinamarca. Allí creó su primera agencia de publicidad cuando apenas tenía 12 años. A través de su actual agencia, Brand Sense Agency, asesora algunas de las más importantes compañías globales en la construcción y reconstrucción de las marcas. Además, contribuye con sus artículos especializados a medios como Time Magazine, Harvard Business Review y Fast Company. En 2009, la revista Time lo eligió como uno de los 100 hombres más influyentes del mundo. Yo soy Santiago Ríos y quiero compartirles en 95.9 Cámara FM esta entrevista que le hice a Martin Lindstrom. La entrevista también estará disponible en www.milpalabras.com.co. Bienvenidos. Thank you, Martin, for being here with us in this interview. And the first question will be, how do you define a brand?
My definition is that when you have a brand, create an emotional relationship with something which is intangible. That means you can't touch it, you can just feel it. And the better you are creating a brand, really the more independent you become at the physical features. So even though people today, they believe that they buy Apple because it's the best product, and a tablet, the iPad because it was the first in the market. Remember the Microsoft in 2002 to release that. So why didn't people buy it? Was it because it was worse? Actually it wasn't. It was actually a pretty good product. But the love affair was not there. All that magic which is associated with the product was not there. So it just became a bare bone product which we could not create an emotional relationship with. So to make a long story short, a brand is all about wrapping something, a service, a product, in emotions.
So does it mean that there is always an emotion attached to any product or service?
Not always. Sometimes there is. Yeah.
Okay.
If I take BP,
okay.
I don't think a lot of people have positive emotional relationships to it.
Okay, but they try harder. I mean, if you don't have the emotional part of a brand, they're going to.
Well, they're not going to
struggle with that.
Yeah, they're going to struggle unless they run other strategies, and there are other strategies, and one of the key strategies is distribution. So you will see that a brand like Microsoft, which people really don't love, they don't have a Microsoft tattoo on them like people have an Apple tattoo. In that case, people still continue using Microsoft. And why do they do that? Because of what we call the stickiness phenomenon. That's because Microsoft has such a sticky product, because once you install the software, you can only read that type of thing, and you can't read anyone else's PowerPoint presentation, and therefore you become isolated. So the stickiness is a huge factor. And then you have other factors like physical distribution. And that's the reason why, for example, Unilever, Ben & Jerry's were fighting against them for a long time in the United States to secure distribution, because they could not secure any visibility. And it's not because Unilever had a bad ice cream, it just had no emotions in it, but they were sitting on all the retail. So you couldn't get a space in the fridge. So there's other parameters which typically is either monopoly driven or which have a twist to it, which means you create an ecosystem of devices, just like the iTunes, which you could only use on an iPhone or similar devices. So that's the replacement of a brand. Now, is that better or worse? Actually, it's pretty okay, because I would claim that for a long time you can actually survive having that. But in the long run, Coca-Cola would not have been around unless they had emotions around them. Because at some stage someone steps up and manages to create a product which can beat that stickiness or to beat the distribution, and then you have nothing left. At least emotions you can't copy.
How this definition of brand has evolved? How do you compare brands now and before, considering this social era in which we are living now?
A lot of things has happened. The first thing that have happened is that the consumers today believe that brands should be available and accessible 24/7. They have the sense of that you can communicate with a brand 7 o'clock in the morning, and if you can't communicate with it, it's not for them. And this is a whole new generation of branding which we've never seen before. The second thing they believe is that they can influence the brand, and the brand should react quickly. And that's a huge problem with the old branding world, which is used to long turnarounds, long product releases, and used to not listening to the consumer. And if they listen, it's through some sort of research company, which are giving them an annual report. So the new social media is forcing companies to be much more adaptable to consumers and listen more to the consumers. And at the end of the day, that means that consumers actually are winning right now, which I think is great news.
Is that true that you started an ad agency when you were 12? Is that true?
No, it's true. It's true. Actually, I started when I was 11, but yeah, it's true.
What was the story?
Well, the story was that I was obsessed with Lego. And wanted to build my own Legoland in the backyard of my mom and dad's garden. So in order to do that, I realized I was very serious about it. It was not just a cute little thing. It was actually pretty serious stuff. But what happens is that suddenly this Legoland takes over, and I start up promoting it, and only 2 people shows up the first day, my mom and my dad. So a bit of a disaster. So I go down to a local advertising agency with a small print office, ask them to sponsor me, and they put an ad in the paper the day after. And exactly 2 days later, I have 131 visitors visiting my Legoland. The problem was that visitor number 130 and visitor number 131 were the lawyers from Lego suing me. And because of that, I said to them, well, how can you do that? And they said, it's our brand. I said, no, it's my brand. I bought it. And they employed me. So I got a job at Lego and realized very quickly that it would be much more fun to start up your own things. So I started up my own advertising agency when I was in the end of 11 years of age, and got Lego as a client. And sold it later on to a company called BBDO when I was 18, and yeah, that's the story.
That's a big and unusual motivation for an 11 years boy.
Well, some play football, other players play hockey, and I create branding. And it's a bit unusual, I know, but I have always known from I was 6 years of age I wanted to go into communication.
En 95.9 Cámara FM estamos hablando con el gurú de las marcas, Martin Lindstrom. Esta entrevista también la pueden encontrar en www.milpalabras.com.co. What are the key factors that make people buy?
Well, it depends on who it is, but the overall factor is what we call an activation of need. Activation of need is a huge difference between that and what some people claim that you can create a need. You cannot create a need.
You cannot.
You cannot create a need. You have a fundamental need. So some people will say to you, well, we didn't have a need for DVD. Yes, you had needs for being entertained. And so need activation is really what great advertising communication is doing. And what a lot of brands are very bad at, they're talking rational factors, which are talking about product features, but they're never able to convert it around to be need activating factors. So things which are making me feel either more secure, more insecure, more happy, work faster, sleep better, whatever it is. They more say this has extra this and that in it, but I can't really see myself in it. And because they talk a language which is disconnected from the consumer just doesn't get it. So the issue in terms of building powerful brands and selling product is to make sure that you talk the consumer's language. And that's the reason why a lot of my work is to spend time with consumers. I literally live with consumers, or at least interview consumers. So whenever I work with a client around the world, including here in Colombia, I spend time in consumers' homes, and I bring out the senior management from the company because they totally lost contact with them. And what they realize in that process is that wow, the client actually can teach us something, and wow, they totally have a different perception about who we are. We thought we were this, and we're actually that. And during that process, you actually align the company. The company, which typically is very defragmented, starts to be much more aligned and talking a similar language because they start to talk the consumer's language. And as you start to adapt that way of thinking, you also start to adapt that in the way you communicate to the consumer. And if you talk to the consumer in the consumer's way, then you also start to think as a consumer, and then you start to activate the needs. So really powerful selling is that.
What are the key values or key needs that marketers use to communicate with the consumers?
Well, the obvious straightforward 3 points are fear and guilt, fear and guilt and sexual drive. These are really the 3 things. Fear of becoming old, fear of lagging behind, fear of becoming fat, fear of being robbed, of fear standing outside the crowd. And these are fundamental needs which almost any product category can or are plugging into. Then you have guilt. Mainly women feel a lot of guilt. Men do too, but women does because the children at home, and they feel that they do not have enough time with their kids. And if companies can go in and somehow convince women that there is more time in life than work, and if you buy this product you actually get more time with your kids, then they'll buy it. And so that's the guilt factor, but guilt factor can be a lot of other factors too, right? The sexual part is interesting because I've been toyed around, is sex really a driver in advertising or not? And I think the final answer is yes, but it has to be in the right context. And the right context is that I saw an ad for vacuum cleaners in Germany where there was a naked lady sitting on top of it. Sometimes it just disconnects. And you remember the sexy bits, but you totally forget about the vacuum cleaner. And that's really a major issue in advertising. People think it's a cheap trick you can use in order to sell products, and the answer is no. But sex has a huge influence indirectly. Sex is when you buy an iPod or an iPad, you buy it because of sexual drive, because you want to be seen as superior and cool and ahead of people, and it's a mating instinct. You want to, when you buy around in that fancy car, you want to show to your girl that you are fancy, right? Or it is that you wear that shirt, and it may be because you're married and stuff like that, you don't care, but if you're not, then you do care about what shirt and what deodorant you wear and how your hair looks like. So sex have a huge drive in us, and I think it's surprising how big part of our lives it takes, in particular men's lives, but also women, and more. So I think in the end of the day, these 3 factors probably cover 95% of all our drivers, right?